pushed my feet along the dirt path, the only sound the soft crunch of my boots on the loose ground. It was just past 9, and the Angels National Forest was exactly what I needed after a week that had felt like one long, annoying meeting. I mean, my job was okay, I guess. I was an architect, so it was all about precision and lines. And sometimes, my head just felt like it was going to burst with all of it. Coming out here, to one of the rarely used access trails outside Pasadena, was my escape. It was quiet, peaceful, and totally deserted. No one else was crazy enough to be out here hiking alone at night, which was kind of the point. The night air was cool, a nice change from the stuffy office. There was a light breeze that made the leaves in the trees rustle. It was a soft, kind of comforting sound, like nature's own white noise machine. I kept my headlamp on a dim setting. I knew this trail like the back of my hand. I'd hiked it dozens of times day and night, so I felt completely fine. More than fine, actually. I felt good, like I could finally think straight. I was maybe an hour into my hike when it happened. A faint whisper, almost too soft to hear, drifted through the trees to my left. It sounded like it came from deeper inside the forest, just off the trail. It sounded like someone calling my name. James. I stopped walking. Boot, already lifted for the next step, just hung there for a second before I slowly lowered it. I stood still, listening, my headlamp beam cutting a small circle of light on the path in front of me. The breeze was still there, the leaves still rustled, but the whisper was gone. I told myself it was probably nothing, just the wind, or maybe an animal deeper in the brush. My mind played tricks on me sometimes. I'd been pretty tired all week, sleeping less than I should have. That was probably it. Just fatigue messing with my hearing. I looked around, sweeping the dim beam of my headlamp from side to side. There was nothing there, just the dense, dark woods, unmoving except for the leaves. I took a breath. It was a big forest. Anything could make a sound. I tried to dismiss it, to just shake it off. It was just exhaustion. That made the most sense. I couldn't imagine anyone else being out on this trail at this hour. Not a soul. It was too out of the way for any kind of casual stroll, and too unused for serious hikers to bother with it regularly. People usually went for the main trails that were well marked and maintained. This one was more rugged, almost forgotten. I started walking again, putting one foot in front of the other. But the silence didn't feel the same anymore. Before, it had been comforting, a blanket of calm. Now, it felt empty. Too empty, almost. Like something was missing from it. Or maybe something was asterisk in it that shouldn't be. The feeling of being alone started to change too. It wasn't the peaceful solitude I relied on anymore. Instead, a subtle unease started to settle in. It was a vague, unsettling feeling, like a knot tightening in my gut. I couldn't quite shake it off, not the way I usually could. Every little sound now seemed amplified. The normal creaks and groans of the trees weren't just background noise. They seemed to catch my attention, making me wonder what was causing them. Was it just the wind or something more? I tightened my grip on the small flashlight I carried, even though my headlamp was still on. It was a habit, I guess. A small comfort. I had hiked here countless times, and never once felt this way. It was just a trail, a dirt path, trees, but the quiet felt different now, heavy. I almost wished for some distant car noise, anything to break the intense stillness that wrapped around me. I kept walking, telling myself to just focus on the path, on the rhythm of my steps. But my eyes kept darting to the left, towards where I thought I heard the whisper. I kept seeing shadows move out of the corner of my eye, even though I knew it was just tree branches swaying in the breeze. My mind was definitely playing tricks on me. That had to be it. I was just letting my guard down, letting my imagination run wild because it was dark and quiet. This was exactly why I came out here, right? To get away from the overthinking, the constant stress. But here I was, doing exactly that, overthinking a sound that was probably just the wind. I consciously tried to relax my shoulders, which I realized had tensed up. My jaw was tight, too. I forced myself to loosen up. It was just a hike, nothing to worry about. But the quiet persisted, almost like it was waiting for something to happen. The air still felt cool, but now I noticed it felt a little colder than it should have for California in late evening. Just a slight difference, barely noticeable, but enough to register in my mind. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. The scent of pine and damp earth filled my nose, a familiar, grounding smell. It was usually soothing. Tonight, it just felt like part of the too quiet atmosphere. I kept my head down, focusing on the path ahead, on where my headlamp beam hit the dirt. I tried to distract myself, thinking about what I'd make for breakfast tomorrow, or my plans for the weekend. Anything to push back against the unease that was seeping into my core. But it was no use. The whisper, faint as it was, had definitely changed something. My usual confidence on this trail was gone, replaced by this nagging feeling. Just a feeling. I told myself it was fine, but it wasn't. Not really. My usual confidence on this trail was gone, replaced by this nagging feeling. Just a feeling. I told myself it was fine, but it wasn't. Not really. I decided to just keep moving, to walk it off. My boots crunched on the dirt path, each step echoing a little too loudly in the quiet. I tried to focus on the rhythm, on the familiar feel of the uneven ground under my feet. It was a good strategy, usually. Keep the mind occupied, keep the body moving. That's what I always told myself out here when work stress got too much. But as I pushed further into the trail, the whispers started to become more distinct. This time, they weren't just off to the left. They were on both sides of me, surrounding me, like I had somehow walked right into the middle of them. They were louder now, too, not faint and airy like before. They clearly said my name, coming from the dense cover of the trees, almost directly into my ears. James, over here. It sounded like they came from the right. Then, almost immediately, a reply from the left. James. I stopped again, the sudden silence of my boots hitting the dirt feeling loud, almost deafening. This was no wind. This wasn't fatigue. I pulled off my headlamp, the thin elastic strap digging into my hair for a second before it came free. I swept the beam across the surrounding foliage, slowly, deliberately. Every trunk, every cluster of leaves, every shadow. Nothing. No one visible. No animal. Just the dark, unmoving forest. But the rustling leaves I had heard before, the ones that had seemed so comforting just an hour ago now oddly seemed to be the source of the voices. It was like the sound of the leaves was the sound of them speaking, only I could somehow make out words mixed in with the rustle. The whispers weren't just my name anymore, either. They started to form short, disjointed phrases. I heard one from somewhere ahead, a low, drawn-out sound that felt cold. "You're lost." Then another, closer this time, from behind me. "We're here." A cold dread started to settle in. It wasn't just the vague unease from before. This was a genuine fear, sharp and clear, like a sudden drop in temperature. And it made my stomach flip. I hadn't experienced anything like it on this trail, not ever. This place had always been my quiet escape, safe and predictable. Now it felt completely wrong. My hands were getting clammy around the small flashlight I still held. The hair on my arms felt like it was standing up. I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe someone was playing a prank. A group of friends hiding in the trees, messing with me. But who would be out here this late on this specific trail? It wasn't exactly a popular spot, even during the day. And the voices, they sounded off, like they weren't quite human. Or maybe it was just my exhaustion really stretching things now, making me hallucinate. That had to be it, right? My mind was just cracking under the pressure of a stressful week, inventing things out of thin air. I stood there, frozen, the headlamp beam cutting through the darkness, moving from one tree to another. The silence between their whispers felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't understand. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, then opened them, hoping everything would look normal again. It didn't. The trees still looked like looming figures. The shadows felt deeper. This was crazy. I was talking about invisible voices in the trees. This was not normal. This was not safe. I had to get out of here. Getting back to my car was the only logical step, the only sane thing to do. There was no point in continuing, not with this feeling creeping over me. The peaceful escape I came for was gone. All I wanted was to be home, in my apartment, away from this eerie quiet and these impossible whispers. I turned quickly, back in the direction of the trailhead, back the way I came. My feet moved faster now, pushing down the dirt path. The easy stroll turned into a quick walk, almost a jog. I tried to focus on the path, on the familiar turns and routes, on anything concrete to ground myself. But the whispers followed me. They seemingly kept rhythm with my steps, like they were staying right with me. Every time my boot hit the ground, a soft whisper seemed to come from nearby. Sometimes, they even seemed to come from right behind me, so close I could almost feel a breath on my neck. "James." Faster. I looked over my shoulder, a quick, jerky head turn. Nothing. Just the dark, winding trail disappearing behind me, swallowed by the trees. No movement. No figures. No source that I could see. My headlamp beam bounced with my quick steps, making the shadows dance, turning familiar shapes into strange, fleeting monsters. I gripped the flashlight tighter, almost digging my nails into the plastic. I just needed to put some distance between myself and this feeling, between myself and these voices that knew my name. I just needed to put some distance between myself and this feeling, between myself and these voices that knew my name. My steps kept a quick, hard rhythm on the dirt, a desperate pace pushing me away from the impossible sounds. The quiet had become a bad thing, a suffocating blanket woven with whispers. The usual comfort I found in these woods was gone, totally replaced by this cold, gut-wrenching fear. I tried to focus on the small circle of light from my headlamp on the path ahead, but my eyes kept darting around, trying to find the source of the voices. The return journey, the way back to my car, was proving to be more terrifying than anything I'd ever experienced. The whispers intensified, no longer just vague, disembodied noises. Now they sounded personal, almost like they were coming from people I knew, and they were accusatory. It was like they were mad at me. "Why did you forget us, James?" A voice hissed, sounding like it was right next to my ear from somewhere in the trees to my left. It was a low, sibilant sound, and it sent a shiver down my back. I stumbled a little, my foot catching on a root I didn't see in the dim light. I caught my balance, my breath coming out in a ragged gasp. Another voice joined in from a little further back, sounding somehow older, more patient. "We've waited." It was like they were having a conversation with me, or about me. The sounds were everywhere now, a swirling chorus coming from the darkness on all sides. It wasn't just my name anymore. It was like they knew things about my life, things only I would know. This wasn't random, not some weird echo or prank. This was aimed directly at me. A sudden, chilling thought hit me, like a splash of ice water. Michael, the name formed in my mind, unbidden, from a place I hadn't thought about in years. Michael Adams, my childhood best friend. We were inseparable, two halves of the same mischievous whole, always exploring these very woods. We knew these small, winding trails better than anyone. He used to say we were like a couple of wild animals, always roaming, always finding new corners of the forest. And then, nearly 20 years ago, Michael vanished, just gone. One day he was there, the next he was. He went missing in these very woods, in these hills, and no one ever found him. The police searched for weeks, maybe months. His family, my family, everyone in our small world was turned upside down. But nothing, no answers, no trace. It was like he just dissolved into the air. His disappearance remained unsolved, a permanent shadow on my memory, on our lives. I never forgot Michael. How could I? He was my first best friend, my closest connection. But I rarely spoke about it with anyone. The unresolved tragedy felt too heavy, too impossible to explain. It was something I just carried, buried deep inside me, a quiet ache that resurfaced only in lonely moments. The whispers, they felt like an open wound, like something I had kept hidden was suddenly being ripped open. They knew my name. They were personal. They were talking about waiting, about forgetting. Could these whispers be connected to Michael? The idea felt crazy, impossible, but also terrifyingly logical in a way nothing else had. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. I remembered how he always loved this place, how he'd joke about the trees having secrets. He'd always said they watched us. As a kid, it was a fun game. Now, it felt like a sick kind of truth. My quick walk turned into a desperate run. My feet pounded against the dirt, my headlamp bouncing wildly, making the trees around me jump and sway as if they were alive. Branches scraped at my arms and legs, a dull, stinging pain across my skin. I ignored it. I barely even felt it. My focus narrowed to just one thing: escaping this psychological torment. The sounds were relentless now, a chorus that seemed to twist and reform with every desperate breath I took. "We remember, James. You weren't here." The words weren't clear, not like actual speaking, but it was like the sounds were being shoved directly into my brain, bypassing my ears. It was a chaotic mix of rustling, scraping, groans, and faint, breathy hisses, all coalescing into something that was undeniably words. All of it knowing me, knowing my past, pulling out things I hadn't thought about with any real intensity in years. These were not just whispers. They were accusations. The trail, which I knew so well, which I had hiked dozens of times, suddenly seemed unfamiliar in the overwhelming darkness and panic. Every turn looked wrong. Every tree seemed to have shifted. Did I miss a marker? Was I going the right way? The panic made my breathing shallow, my chest feeling tight, like a band was squeezing it. I was losing my sense of direction, even though I knew this trail backwards and forwards. The twists and turns felt exaggerated, the path wider, and then narrower than I remembered. The dark was so heavy that the beam from my headlamp seemed to shrink, barely cutting through the black. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, then opened them, forcing myself to look straight ahead. I needed to see something familiar, something that told me I was on the right path. But every shadow seemed to stretch, every branch seemed to reach, clawing at the edges of my vision. My imagination was running wild, but it felt like the woods themselves were working against me, trying to disorient me. I could feel a cold sweat trickling down my back, mixing with the scrapes on my arms. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. This wasn't a relaxing hike anymore. This wasn't an escape. This was a nightmare, and I was desperately trying to wake up. My feet felt heavy, my legs burning with the effort, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't slow down. The voices wouldn't let me. They were all around me, a growing crescendo of accusation and sorrow. James left us, lonely. The words sliced through the air, piercing the frantic thumping against my ribs. I stumbled again, almost falling, but somehow kept myself upright. The sounds were so close now, so numerous. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of bark, every distant hoot of an owl seemed to carry a piece of their message. It was like the forest itself was speaking, its ancient voice finally breaking through the silence it had kept for all these years. I pushed harder, fueled by the desperate need to escape their voices, to get away from the impossible idea that something was reaching out from the past, calling my name, holding me accountable for something I couldn't understand. My mind spun, trying to grasp onto logic, anything concrete, but the only thing I could hold onto was Michael's name. It echoed the same way the whispers did, a cold, empty reminder of a story that never closed. The trail kept twisting, pulling me further into the strange, disorienting darkness. I felt like I was running in circles, even though I knew I was moving in a straight line back towards the trailhead. The air tasted metallic, cold, and heavy. It clung to me, pushing at my skin, making the hairs on my arms stand straight up. I felt trapped, caught in something I couldn't see, couldn't fight, something that knew me intimately and wouldn't let me go. I looked from side to side, desperately trying to recognize something, anything, that would tell me I was still on the correct path. It all looked the same now, just endless, dark trees, shadows, and the overwhelming, inescapable whispers. I looked from side to side, desperately trying to recognize something, anything, that would tell me I was still on the correct path. It all looked the same now, just endless, dark trees, shadows, and the overwhelming, inescapable whispers. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I kept pushing, fueled by the desperate need to get away from the impossible sounds. Each step was a battle against the rising panic, against the feeling that the woods themselves were closing in on me. The whispers were a constant torment, growing louder, more insistent, twisting familiar sounds into accusatory phrases that burrowed into my mind. I focused on the small circle of light from my headlamp, on the sliver of dirt path it illuminated, trying to ignore the chaotic symphony of rustles and hisses around me. My feet slid on loose leaves, and I nearly went down, catching myself on a mossy tree trunk. My headlamp beam swept across the rough bark, and that's when I saw it. Carved into the old, gnarled oak, almost faded by time and the encroaching moss, were two sets of initials, JM plus JA. A cold shock went through me. My breath hitched. I knew that tree. Michael and I had carved those initials nearly 20 years ago on one of our endless explorations. It was our secret spot, a marker we swore only we'd ever know. This tree, here now, felt like an impossible beacon, a physical connection to a past I was trying to outrun. The moment I saw our initials, the whispers erupted. It wasn't just a few voices anymore. It was a deluge, a crashing wave of chaotic sound. They were all speaking at once, a terrifying chorus that hammered at my ears, pressing in from every direction. It was like dozens of unseen speakers had converged on this single spot, all screaming directly into my head. "You left him, James." A voice shrieked, sharp and shrill, cutting through the din. It sounded furious, filled with a deep, crushing anger. I flinched, my hands flying up, almost covering my ears, but I knew it wouldn't help. The sound wasn't just in my ears, it was in my bones, vibrating through my whole body. Then another voice, softer, more fragile, broke through the noise. It was a high-pitched sound, a light, reedy whimper that stole the air right from my lungs. "Where are you, James?" It sounded like a child, a young boy. That small, wavering voice, the familiar initials on the tree, the accusations of leaving someone behind it, all slammed into me at once. There was no denying it anymore. The whispers were Michael. They had to be. This wasn't a hallucination, not some elaborate prank. This was real. This was Michael, or something connected to him, crying out from the darkness, from a past I had tried so hard to bury. The realization felt like a physical blow. My legs gave out, and I dropped to my knees on the cold, damp forest floor. The impact stung, but I barely registered it. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the impossible. Michael, my friend, gone for 20 years, was somehow here now in these impossible voices. It was a terrifying, heart-wrenching truth. Grief mixed with a raw, primal terror paralyzing me. I just knelt there, staring at the faded initials, my headlamp beam shaking wildly as my hands trembled. I had to confront it. I had to know. My throat felt tight, dry as dust, but I forced the words out, a desperate, shaky plea into the overwhelming noise. "Michael, is that you?" I yelled. My voice hitched, sounding small and frail against the crushing weight of the whispers. The cacophony of sound quieted slightly immediately after I spoke. It wasn't total silence, but the overwhelming, panicked chorus faded, leaving behind a quieter, more mournful hum. The individual whispers still echoed around me, but they were softer now, almost hesitant. Then, a single, sorrowful whisper emerged from the quieted chorus, sounding like it came from the gnarled oak tree itself, right where the initials were carved. It was low and drawn out, filled with regret, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of all those lost years. "You should have looked harder." The words pierced through me, a sharp, cold blade straight to the gut. Looked harder asterisk. I had lived with the guilt of Michael's disappearance for so long, the helpless feeling that I hadn't done enough, that no one had. But to hear it voiced, to hear it from what felt like Michael himself, was agonizing. It validated every unspoken fear, every buried regret. My eyes were glued to the initials on the tree, my thoughts spiraling, when something small and dull caught the edge of my headlamp beam on the ground beside my knee. I looked down. There, resting on a bed of damp leaves, was a small, round compass. It was old, its brass casing tarnished, the glass scratched, but I knew it instantly. It was the same compass I had given Michael for his 10th birthday. His parents had scoffed, saying he'd just lose it, but he loved it. He always carried it on our adventures, a self-proclaimed explorer, even if we were just in the woods behind our houses. He had never been without it, not once. The fact that it was here now, beside this impossibly old tree, confirmed everything. It was the compass Michael had always treasured, the same compass that had vanished with him. A distinct whisper, soft and breathy, almost like a sigh of resignation, came from the oak tree directly from the wood. It was clear, unmistakable. "Find the clearing." The words hung in the air, a final directive, a somber command. My mind struggled to catch up, grappling with the new, horrifying truth that was unfolding before me. Michael hadn't just vanished. He hadn't just disappeared without a trace. He had possibly died here in these woods, and these voices, this haunting chorus, this impossible compass, were all tied to his unresolved past, to his final moments. The compass, a gift from me, a symbol of our shared adventures, now felt like a desperate plea, a breadcrumb leading me not to safety, but to the painful finality of Michael's end. The small, round compass lay in the palm of my hand, cold and heavy. One moment, I was staring at the initials on the old, gnarled oak, lost in the terrible realization that the whispers were Michael. And the next, I was looking down at the compass nestled in the damp leaves beside my knee. It was a tangible thing, something I could touch, a connection to a past that had just violently ripped itself open. The brass casing felt cool against my skin, rough with tarnish, and the glass face was scratched, but there was no mistaking it. This was the same compass I had given Michael for his 10th birthday, a cheap little toy that had meant the world to him. He was never without it, not on any of our adventures in these woods. I picked it up, my fingers shaking slightly. The needle, a thin black line, spun wildly at first, a blur of motion, as if confused by the sudden change in its position. I held it steady, my eyes fixed on the chaotic dance of the needle, my breathing shallow. Slowly, almost reluctantly, it started to settle, wavering for a few agonizing seconds before pointing east, directly east, away from the main trail, away from the direction I had been frantically trying to run in. "The clearing," I muttered, the words barely a whisper, half to myself, half to the silent, waiting woods. I remembered an abandoned logging clearing. It wasn't on any of the main trails, just a wide, flat space deep in the woods, overgrown now, but still recognizable. Michael and I had found it years ago, some forgotten corner where trees had been cut down decades before, leaving an open wound in the forest. We used to explore it constantly, pretending we were pioneers finding new lands. It was one of our secret spots, just like the tree with our initials. Now, the compass was pointing me towards it, and the voices, Michael's voices, were telling me to go there. A shiver went through me, not just from the cold night air, but from something deeper, something unsettling that had lodged itself in my bones. The voices wanted me to go there. I understood now. This wasn't just a haunting or a cruel trick of my mind. It was a message, a desperate plea from the past, made real by an old compass and the echoes of a lost friend. The terrifying logic of it all made a strange kind of sense to me. There was a newfound, unsettling resolve building inside me. My terror was still there, a knot in my stomach, but it was now mixed with a desperate need for answers, a compulsion that tightened its grip on me. I stood up, my knees protesting a little after kneeling on the cold, hard ground, but I ignored the ache. I adjusted my headlamp, the beam swinging to illuminate the dense growth away from the faint dirt path I had been on. The flashlight moved across thick brush, tangled roots, and damp leaves. This was no longer just a hike. It was a quest, and the compass was my guide. With the compass still clutched in my hand, I started walking in the direction it indicated, moving off the familiar path. The woods immediately felt different. The air grew thicker, denser, the silence more profound than before, broken only by the crunch of my own footsteps on unseen leaves and twigs. I pushed through thick brush, the branches scraping against my jacket and jeans, a familiar feeling from past adventures with Michael. I navigated around fallen logs that had been rotting there for years, some of them covered in a soft green moss that gave way under my boots. Adrenaline, a cold, steady current, kept me moving. I was no longer just scared. I was compelled, driven by the compass, and the spectral pleas that had followed me, harassed me, and now, it seemed, guided me. As I took my first few steps into the denser parts of the woods, away from the faint outline of the familiar trail, the whispers around me changed. They became less accusatory, less frenzied. The chaotic screaming that had hammered at my ears moments before had faded into a softer, almost reverent hum. The individual voices that made up the chorus were still there, like faint echoes, but they took on a different quality. They were no longer taunting me or judging me. Instead, they seemed to carry something else, a quiet suggestion, a gentle urge. "This way, James," came a soft voice, almost like a sigh, from somewhere to my right. It was a familiar voice, an echo of Michael's when he was a boy, full of excitement and curiosity. Another whisper, barely audible, seemed to rustle through the leaves directly ahead of me. Here, it was like they were leading me, a silent, constant presence moving with me through the trees. I pushed through a particularly thick patch of thorny bushes, a few sharp points catching on my sleeves, but I barely registered the minor sting. My focus was entirely on the compass and the direction it pointed. I trusted it in a way I couldn't explain, a trust born out of desperation and the horrifying truth of Michael's voice. With every step deeper into the woods, the air around me grew colder. It was a faint chill at first, barely noticeable, but it deepened, seeped into my bones. It felt distinct from the usual night air, from the natural coldness of the forest after dark. It was a different kind of cold, a chill that hinted at age, at something lying still and quiet for a very long time. The deeper I went, the more pronounced it became, a constant, low presence that settled over everything. I wrapped my arms around myself, pulling my flimsy jacket tighter, though I knew it wouldn't help against this kind of cold. It wasn't a weather thing. It was something else. The woods felt old, burdened with untold stories. The trees, their branches twisted and gnarled, seemed to loom over me, their vast, silent presence watching, waiting. The air, heavy and still, felt thick with unspoken history, with the ghosts of past events. Every shadow seemed deeper, every rustle of leaves more significant. All of it, every tiny detail, felt like it was leading me closer. A silent, slow, unbearable draw to the truth of Michael's disappearance. I could almost feel the weight of those past 20 years pressing down on the forest around me, compressing the air, pushing me forward, deeper and deeper into its heart. The path ahead was dark, unknown, but the compass in my hand and the low, guiding whispers urged me on. I pushed through the last curtain of thick, hanging vines, their cold, damp tendrils brushing against my face and jacket. The branches scratched over my shoulders, and then, suddenly, I was out. My boots sunk into soft, damp earth, and a different kind of quiet settled over me. It felt like I had stepped into a room where someone had just turned off a noisy machine. The constant, low hum of the whispers, the guiding echoes of Michael's voice that had been with me for what felt like hours, simply stopped. Nothing, just the faint sound of my own ragged breathing, which sounded too loud in the sudden, deep quiet. I was in the clearing. It wasn't as open as I remembered it from 20 years ago. Back then, it had been a wide, sun-drenched space, almost like a secret field carved out of the dense woods. Now it was choked with overgrown bushes and young saplings trying to reclaim the space. Fallen leaves, decades worth of them, covered everything in a deep, soft carpet. The air no longer felt heavy with the weight of the past. Instead, It felt strangely light, almost mournful, like a great burden had finally been lifted. My eyes swept across the familiar landscape, a place I hadn't truly thought about in years. Then, my headlamp beam caught on something in the center of the clearing. It was half buried by the thick layer of leaves and dirt, mostly hidden from view. Just a few rusted, bent metal pieces showing out of the earth. I knew what it was instantly. It was the frame of our old fort, or what was left of it. Michael and I had dragged all sorts of scrap metal and old wood into this clearing back then, building a pathetic, wobbly structure we had called our impenetrable fortress. It had long since collapsed, rusting away into the forest floor, but I still recognized the twisted metal, a skeletal reminder of our childhood dreams. I walked towards it, my boots crunching softly on the leaves, the only sound in the profound quiet. As I got closer, I saw a small, dark shape beside the collapsed metal frame. It was partially exposed, almost entirely hidden by a mound of damp leaves that had piled up around it. It looked like a crudely carved wooden box, wet with morning dew. The wood looked dark, almost black in spots, from decades of dampness and decay. This had to be it. The whispers had led me here. The compass had pointed the way. Every impossible thing that had happened since I stepped into these woods had led me to this small, forgotten thing. I dropped to my knees, not caring about the cold, damp earth soaking into my jeans. My hands, trembling slightly, began to dig around the box. The leaves were thick and matted, packed tight around it, but they gave way easily. My fingers brushed against the rough, damp wood, and I pulled, but it was stuck fast, held in place by the accumulated dirt of 2 decades. I dug harder, scooping out handfuls of mud and leaves, feeling the cold, wet earth under my fingernails. Finally, with a soft squelch, the box came loose. I pulled it free, holding it carefully in my hands. It was heavier than I expected, dense with the absorbed moisture. The wood was rough, unpolished, clearly something a kid had put together. The lid, also carved by hand, was still mostly intact, though warped by time. I ran my thumb over the grain, feeling the faint, raised lines. My fingers went to the edge of the lid, my breath catching in my throat. I pushed it open. It moved with a soft groan of old wood, hinges long rusted away. Inside, nestled in the damp, dark interior of the box, was a sealed, watertight plastic bag. It looked like a regular Ziploc bag, the kind you'd pack a sandwich in for lunch. It was cloudy with condensation, but I could make out 2 items inside. One was a wallet, dark and worn, its edges frayed. The other was a folded piece of paper, the yellowed edges showing through the frosty plastic. I pulled the bag out, my fingers fumbling with the seal. It felt cold against my skin, the plastic crinkling softly. I managed to unseal it, peeling back the top slowly. The air that came out of the bag was stale, trapped for decades, carrying the scent of old paper and something vaguely metallic. I pulled out the wallet first. It was Michael's. I recognized the worn leather, the slightly off-center stitching Michael's mom had done when she had repaired it after he ripped it jumping off a hay bale. It was flat, empty, but it was his. I I almost expected to see his driver's license, but Michael was just 10. There was nothing left inside. No lingering smell of old gum or loose change. Then I pulled out the note. It was fragile, so incredibly thin, the paper almost like tissue. There was no envelope, just the paper, folded several times over into a neat rectangle. It felt dry and brittle in my fingers, ready to crumble into dust. I unfolded it carefully, my hands steady now despite the profound shift happening inside me. The words, written in Michael's neat, slightly slanting handwriting, stood out clearly against the faded paper. James, asterisk, I fell. I was climbing in the crevice, trying to get your soldier back, and my foot slipped. My gaze snapped to the space directly under where the fort used to be. I remembered that crevice. It was a narrow, deep crack in the earth, hidden by thick roots and overgrowth. We used to drop pebbles into it, listening for the faint splash, guessing how deep it was. I had dropped a small plastic soldier, a favorite toy, into it that day. I read on, my eyes blurring slightly, but I forced them to focus. My leg gets broken. I can't move. A wave of cold washed over me. He had been hurt, trapped, not just vanished. I yelled. I remembered that. Michael screaming my name. But I had been with my mom, getting ready to leave. I had thought it was just the wind or Michael playing a game. I heard you leave. You didn't look. The words, "You should have looked harder," from the whispers echoed in my mind. A chilling confirmation of Michael's silent accusation. A message held for 20 years. A profound, aching sadness settled over me, heavy and cold. It's getting dark now. I'm scared. No one will find me down here. It's too deep. The words were so small, so simple, yet they contained a crushing weight of despair. Michael, alone, injured, waiting for help that never came. Tell my mom I love her. Tell her it wasn't her fault. Don't tell James, he'll feel bad. A sharp, painful gasp escaped my lips. He had worried about me. Even then, in his last moments, he had tried to protect me. I closed my eyes, a tear finally breaking free and tracing a path down my cheek, cold against my skin. The guilt, an old, familiar friend, was back. But this time, it was different. It was laced with a new understanding, a terrible, heartbreaking clarity. Michael knew I hadn't known. He knew I wouldn't have left him. I opened my eyes, the words blurring again, but I needed to read the rest. I'm so cold. I wish you were here, James. The final line was a scrawl, shaky and faint, as if written with the last remnants of his strength. Love, Michael. It was a simple, small ending to a young life, hidden away in a plastic bag, sealed in a wooden box, buried in a forgotten clearing in the woods. Michael hadn't been taken by some strange force. He hadn't just disappeared. He had fallen, gotten hurt, and then slowly, alone, succumbed to his injuries and the cold. He had been trapped, unheard, his calls dissolving into the vast indifference of the forest. The whispers, the phantom voices, they weren't curses or taunts. They were echoes of a boy who had needed help, who was scared and alone, trapped and waiting for rescue. They were his story, finally told. I continued to sit there, the plastic bag clutched in my hand, the brittle note a testament to a life cut short, a profound sadness washing over me. It felt like the world had taken a slow, deep breath, and finally, after 20 years, let it out. The terror was gone. The confusion had cleared. All that was left was this aching sorrow, but also, surprisingly, a sense of closure, of peace. It was a heavy, mournful peace, but it was there, settling over me like the morning dew on the leaves. I carefully placed the note and the wallet back into the plastic bag, resealing it, and then put the bag back into the wooden box. I closed the lid, the soft groan of the old wood sounding like a final sigh. I stood up, my knees stiff and protesting, but I didn't care. I finally knew what had happened. With the wooden box tucked carefully under my arm, I turned and started to walk out of the clearing, heading back through the curtain of vines, back towards the faint, familiar path. The sun was just starting to filter through the thick trees, casting long, pale shadows across the forest floor. The woods were quiet now, truly quiet, the whispers gone, the guiding voices silent, the burden of Michael's untold story finally laid to rest. I carried the box and its contents out of the woods, knowing I would finally give Michael a proper resting place near his family home in Pasadena, California. A place he loved, a place he should have returned to 20 years ago.